kicking off. Tim Montgomerie, political commentator. Hello, Tim.
Hi, John.
And we want to hear from you too. Do send me a text, 87222. Start with the word Times on welfare reform, on Donald Trump's big, beautiful bill. Whatever's on your mind, share your thoughts. And you can see and watch us here in the studio on Times Radio's YouTube channel. So do, if you fancy seeing it as well as listening.
Oh, no.
But either way, stay with us and do join in. Look, we're going to talk about the mess at the House of Commons over the welfare reforms in just a moment. But I do want to ask you first of all, guys, for your thought for the day, Tim.
Well, John, sometimes I'm a bit off message, aren't I? Well, I mean, occasionally. I'm going to be on message today. And I apologise in advance that this may sound like a party political broadcast on behalf of the Reform Party. But I think Nigel Farage said something quite important and interesting at the weekend, which is a big motivation for me actually joining Reform. And he said, I know a lot of you don't like me, but I might be the only thing on this side of something much worse. And what did you probably saw, you saw it, John, and what did he mean by that? And we're about to talk about the welfare bill and, well, what the point of it is. But I think we are seeing, potentially, the simultaneous failure of both of the main political parties, the Conservatives and Labour in office. Labour obviously have got time to put it right. But if Nigel Farage is, assume that Labour continue to struggle and the people will vote for something else at the next election. They won't vote Conservative, they'll vote for a change. It's actually really important that Reform don't mess up as well, because I think revolutionary spirit is too strong, but there is a mood of unrest in the country. There is palpable anger and disappointment with the political establishment. Nigel Farage, for me, is fundamentally a good person. You don't have to agree with him on anything, but the way he keeps Tommy Robinson, Rupert Lowe and other people outside of the party now, I think he knows where the line needs to be drawn between what's acceptable and unacceptable. If he fails in the context of Tory and Labour failure, I do worry what could be next. And part of why I left the Conservatives for Reform, I'm not happy about everything in Reform. I often discuss it with you and Rachel at 6 o'clock every Tuesday evening. But I think it's ultimately a patriotic force that wants to do the right thing. And making it succeed, all of us, we have an interest in the Labour Party succeeding now. We don't want our governments to fail. It's not good for the country. But actually using the next 3 years to ensure Reform is a credible, national, supportive of the common good really matters to me and should matter to everyone, even if they're not Reform. And I think what Nigel said at the weekend wasn't just a statement, a personal statement. I think it was an encouragement really to those, particularly on the centre-right, to play a part in making sure Reform does succeed and not just criticise it from the sidelines, because it may be the only thing stopping us having something actually much worse.
Okay, I mean, that is only half an argument, isn't it, at best? I mean, certainly you could say there's me, or there's something much, much worse, something darker, whatever it happens to be. Your worst nightmares could come true. Is that even half an argument? Because if you're saying it's me, go with me, you have to say who me is and what me is going to do for the country and for you. And a great deal of that, and you've admitted, it's still lacking. Yeah,
it is. And I think we have a very honest conversation here every Tuesday evening. Often it's a therapy session in some part. But I don't think Reform are ready for government yet. But I think they have a lot of instincts on net zero, on immigration, on the size of the state. I think they have the right instincts. And what I'm trying to do, and what I encourage people on the centre-right to do, is not just sit there and wait for Reform potentially to fail, but to help it succeed as a project. Because actually it really is high stakes. If Reform fail in the context of the Labour and Tory failure, it's not just about who then wins which colour. It's actually about whether democracy continues to have the confidence of the people.
I mean, that still leaves intact the argument that maybe what we need is let's say, a Labour government that does a better job than it's doing today, for sure, which wouldn't be difficult, or a Tory government which is doing a better job of being a Tory party than it's doing at the moment. I mean, that's a huge space which the argument you're putting forward doesn't begin to address.
I think it does address it.
You're saying you write off those other parties and mainstream politics.
Well, I'm saying the choice at the next election, I still think the likeliest outcome at the next election, although predictions are foolish probably at this stage, is some kind of Labour-Lib Dem alliance. I think if you just look at the electoral maths, But the choice will be basically Labour, Liberal or Reform. I don't think the Conservatives will stand a chance at the next election.
Yeah.
And therefore it matters the quality of reform. And I think Nigel is underappreciated for the role he plays in keeping the populist right this side of acceptable.
He actually said that in an interview with the New Statesman last year, just before the election. He made exactly that point, that, you know, he was the force. He took credit for the demise of Britain.
BNP.
The BNP, yeah. But I do think if you want to be taken seriously as a credible force in government, don't go around saying, we're going to undo all the unpopular measures. You can have everything. You can have the winter fuel allowance. You can have the lifting of the 2-child benefit cap. You can have the threshold of paying income tax raised to £20,000. You can have tax breaks left, right and centre, and we can pay for all of it with, you know, imaginary waste. And don't say we can sort out local councils just by cutting waste and woke stuff when more than 2/3 of council spending is spent on social care. If you want to be taken seriously, if you want to be credible, you being the Reform Party, not you personally, Tim, but if you want to be taken seriously and you want to not be in a position where the Conservatives have failed, Labour have failed, and now you're failing and the populists come in, then a little bit of honesty, a little bit less of this, we can do everything and there are no trade-offs in politics.
I agree with every word you've just said.
You should tell your mate Nigel that.
I have, on this programme.
So basically you're saying come back in 2 years, 2.5 years, I think give us your verdict.
No, well, watch, you know, those incredibly important Welsh and Scottish elections next year. Reform don't have 3 years. You know, by this time next year, before this time next year, the elections will be in May, I think, aren't they? A credible manifesto for Scotland and Wales will be when you begin to really test how serious and ready we are.
Okay, well, there's your thought. What's your thought, Rachel?
My thoughts about advisors, because we're going to be talking more about welfare and how Labour got into this mess shortly. But one of the names that has been swirling around in the blame game is Morgan McSweeney, the Prime Minister's Chief of Staff, who was the head of the election campaign. And I always think it's worrying when the advisor, the unelected advisor, becomes the story. I don't think people really outside Westminster should know the name Morgan McSweeney. I think it's always a sign that something's gone wrong when they do, whether it's Sue Gray or Dominic Cummings or Alistair Campbell or whoever. But I also think there's a very lazy tendency in politics to blame the advisor as opposed to blaming the person in charge. And there are all sorts of things you could say about Morgan McSweeney's vision for what Labour should be, and it's antagonising a lot of left-wing Labour MPs, and he believes the right way forward is to focus on neutralising reform, and they feel that he's abandoned the left-wing base, all of which is totally valid, but he is not the Prime Minister. The Prime Minister is the Prime Minister, and if you put somebody in charge, I don't know how much he has been in charge, but if you put somebody in charge whose entire goal is looking at spreadsheets and crunching the raw data and working out how you might, optimise your vote for the next election, then you're going to be in a situation where you take your MPs for granted, which is exactly what's happened. So I wrote this column for the New Statesman looking at other times when advisors have been blamed and then those advisors have left or been forced out. And surprise, surprise, what we did not get was a subsequent period of calm, decisive, collaborative, well-managed government, because often it's not actually the advisor's fault.
No, I mean, well, the buck stops at the top, and we had this with Dominic Cummings and Boris Johnson, and there are other examples.
Fiona Hill and Nick Timothy in the Theresa May era.
Yeah, all of that. Okay, there's your thought. Good one. Wonder what people think about that. Send us a text on the tweet. Now we're going to talk about welfare, which is a tangle. We're now in a position at 12:15 with maybe another 45 minutes, a bit more, of the debate in the House of Commons, debating the legislation for welfare reform, still to play, where there's no welfare reform left. There's legislation, but the government's gutted it. They've taken out the element, the very controversial and important element, which had to do with the system of personal independence payments to disabled people, many of them in work. A lot of Labour potential rebels hated what they were being asked to support. They say it was going to be harsh on people who needed help. The government was left with, by making concessions to the rebels, a system where a review was put into place, was promised to be carried out by the disabled and Social Security Minister Stephen Timms. He was going to carry out the review, listen to Labour MPs' objections, but meanwhile the system was going to get going and their demands for change. The whole thing has been pushed down the road quite a long way, And we're left with the legislation bringing in, at this stage, little more than a promise. Reynolds, he's the business secretary, was asked about all of this on breakfast this morning by Stig Abel. He had this to say.
You love a review, this government, don't you? Stephen Timms, you announced a review for him, but you've also announced changes that are going to happen before the review report. So what's the point of that? Either do the changes or do the review. You're kind of ending up doing the changes, then the review.
Well, first of all, look, there has to be, action to address some of these problems. On the specific point about timescales, no one is going to have anything changed before November 2026. And we've made clear the reason that review is important is it's got co-production at the heart of it. So that might sound like jargon, but it means disabled people, disabled groups having direct access and shaping that policy themselves. That is a really important part of this. And if anyone is in a position where they've had a claim that's been perhaps rejected after that November 26 point, but then the new system would make that different, their claims will then be fast-tracked. So I do think we need to take action now because the system's failing and we've got to correct that.
All of which left MPs at best confused and at worst feeling as if they'd been let down. And in the Commons, you've got the Work and Pension Secretary, Liz Kendall, earlier, who was stressing the need for speed.
We are absolutely committed to moving quickly and completing the review by next autumn. And I want to assure the House any changes following the Timms review will be implemented as soon as is practically possible.
Change as soon as possible after the review. Well, that just didn't wash. So what happened was this. The man in charge of the review, Stephen Timms, came to the dispatch box and had this to say.
I want to make this point to him that he and others across the House during this debate have raised concerns that the changes to PIP are coming ahead of the conclusions of the review of the assessment that I'll be leading. We've heard those concerns, and that is why I can announce that we are going to remove the Clause 5 from the bill at committee, that we will move straight to the wider review, sometimes referred to as the Timms review, and only make changes to PIP eligibility activities and descriptors following that review.
And hey presto, it was gone. The reform was gone. There will be now a review followed by action, taking aboard all of the objections. We don't know what it's going to look like when that process is complete. They do want to get the legislation through, which will signify, well, actually comparatively very little. Let's get your thoughts on that in just a moment here on Pienaar and Friends. I'm John Pienaar, here with Drive from Barclays Business Banking. Grow your business. Bank on Barclays.
Or wherever you get your podcasts.
Pienaar and Friends on Times Radio with Barclays Business Banking. Grow your business. Bank on Barclays.
Here with me on Pienaar and Friends, Tim Montgomerie and Rachel Cunliffe. And at Westminster, not very much left of a welfare reform bill. They've taken out the most controversial, contentious bit and said MPs can have their say about what they want to put in its place, and they won't do anything until that happens. The vote is still coming in about 40 minutes time, just over. But Rachel, they might as well not bother.
Well, or what are they voting on? And actually, Andy MacDonald, the Labour MP, made exactly that point, because they have said, the government have said, we're going to take out the controversial bit. But in terms of what's written down, the legislation they're voting on, the contentious bits are still in. So even this 11th hour U-turn that guts it and really takes out a significant amount of what the government was trying to do, even that isn't enough and has further antagonised some Labour MPs who I think you've got to separate. Rebels is quite an emotive term, but by this point there are MPs who are fundamentally against sort of any kind of cuts and reform of this nature. There are MPs who want to cause the government trouble. There are also MPs who don't deliberately just want to be troublemakers, but who have serious concerns about the bill and don't feel that the government has been listening and don't feel that they have been treated with sort of respect and consideration. And actually the way this has played out over the last 2 days, the announcements that we've had from Liz Kendall in the Commons, the confusion over what's in and what isn't, the last minute nature of this really do suggest that they kind of have a point with the communication between Downing Street and the rest of the parliamentary party.
Tim?
At a fundamental level, they don't know what they're doing. I worked on universal credit proposal with Ian Duncan Smith, the Centre for Social Justice. I remember we worked on it for about 3.5 years before Ian Duncan Smith became the Welfare Secretary in 2010. And it had all sorts of problems. We've ended up, universal credit means that Britain has the best, most integrated digital benefit system in Europe. It had its teething problems and still has some challenges. But if we hadn't known what we were going to do, George Osborne was never really a fan of the proposal. We had austerity that meant it was hard. But we knew what we wanted to do, and it was hard, therefore, to be knocked off fundamental course because we thought it through. We'd been across Europe. It was a proper reform. You may not always agreed with it, but it was a proper reform. And Michael Gove, his schools proposals, there was a new schools network in opposition, years of preparation for it. And, we can talk about individual problems with this bill. And I think Rachel Reeves, is more responsible for this mess than Liz Kendall, because it was basically the Treasury changed the terms of this whole strategy quite recently and needed more cuts. But you survive something like that if you know what you're doing in the first place. You've got a big vision plan. But we can look at the individual reasons why this welfare bill is failing. But at a broad level, I would say the problem is Labour haven't got a big plan on whether it's on welfare, on immigration, on the economy. They haven't. The Tories just threw away the last election. They were so bad towards the end that Labour were not given the proper scrutiny that an opposition party should have been given in opposition, and then they're not and still aren't fundamentally prepared for government. And I think we're seeing that in extraordinary style tonight.
It's quite difficult to disagree with Tim, isn't it, on that? So this process was clearly transparently driven along by the Treasury saying, look, I want 5 billion here, I want 7 billion there, instead of looking at welfare reform, which is about as knotty a project as any government could take on, especially a Labour government. Look at the reaction you're going to get from the heart and soul of the Labour movement as it sits in Parliament. You just couldn't do it that way round, and the government was bound hand and foot by its need to match the fiscal rules. Everything else was subsidiary to that.
Well, yeah, it all comes down to the fact that Rachel Reeves realised in, I think it was March, in the spring statement, that she was short of a certain amount of money and sought to find it through welfare. I think the sort of more fundamental problem is that this reform is intended to do two quite different things that are connected but are fundamentally quite different. One of them is about, and I think there is a genuine moral case for this, is about making reforms that make it easier for people who have some health conditions to try work, to be supported into work, to not be written off, and not to have a binary system where it's quite difficult to get onto it. And I know that I know that there are people out there who think that you can just sort of answer 3 questions on the phone and that's it, you're sorted for life. But if you talk to people who are on these health benefits, they will say it's very stressful, it's time consuming getting onto them, and once you're on them, the idea of risking that by, if your health condition changes slightly, by going into the workforce and knowing that if it doesn't work out, that's it, you've lost everything, is terrifying. So reforms to that system that mean that it's easier to assess people on what they can actually do, and it's more of a fluid, flexible and supportive system, there's a fundamental case for that. There is also the saving money case. And the thing is, the first one, in the long term, you would hope will save money, will cut the bill in total, because it will lead to more people being able to work to a degree that they are able to do under the system, and that will save money. But you can't do that kind of as a side consequence of our primary aim is to save money. And so they focused on the saving money bit and have ended up in this mess where they can't even do the bit that actually is positive, is constructive, is compassionate.
Can I talk just a little bit personally about this as well? Because I had real mental health problems during the pandemic, and there were times when I was afraid to even leave the house. There were demons inside me, and I was never on welfare, but it's been a slow process for me, and it's not been linear. And I thank you, John, and the production team here. There have been times when I cancelled at the last minute. I was given a lot of support by this institution, and it was a very relational thing. And it probably, I was supported by a good employer and by a family. They took me through this process. But if it had been, and Fraser Nelson of this parish has spoke very powerfully about this, is actually getting people off welfare is in the long run good of the person and of the state. You save money and you build talent. But actually in the short run, it's a really difficult process, and people move at different levels, at different rates, and they go backwards sometimes. And what the government has tried to do, and I think Rachel put it very well a few moments ago, is they've tried to make short-term savings when actually what you need is long-term reform, and a long-term reform vision that will save money, will release talent. But you can't do it on the cheap. You can't do it quickly. And I mentioned a little while ago the universal credit proposals from Ian Duncan Smith. Alongside that, there was this idea of universal support, which has never been properly funded. And universal support was the idea that some people will never be able to respond to the incentives in the same way as others who are already in a good place. You have to help a lot of people through this process of change. And until we really understand how difficult the movement from welfare to work is, and how variable it is from person to person, we are not going to crack this nut. And you said earlier about it being a very thorny knot to unpick, and it really is. And I feel political disappointment at this, but I feel a lot of personal disappointment for it, because I am very lucky that the sort of people I have around me, I've established in my field, and therefore people were willing to give me time. But other people who are perhaps more isolated, more vulnerable, they don't have that support around them, and it's the least the state can do is to give them the basics. And it's a tragedy that that's not been done at all well in this reform.
Do you reckon, Rachel, that we're still barely a year into what will be a good 5-year parliament? There's time to learn lessons if the Prime Minister, especially, is capable of learning those lessons and realising you need a clear notion of what you're there for. You need a way of telling that story to convince people, and that won't always be done overnight. There's time to get that right, do you think?
Yes, I think there's time to get that right. The question is how you do that and what needs to change in order for that to happen. I mean, 1 year in is a bit early for a reset, but I think we should remember that this is not the kind of Brexit wars of Theresa May's government where there wasn't a majority. This isn't the tail end of Rishi Sunak's government where we knew an election was coming and they didn't have any time to do anything. The government has 4 years if it wants it, and a majority. There is a lot that they could do in that time frame. I mean, think how much has changed in the last 4 years of politics. But the reason I think this is really worrying, and why I think that it's this moment, this night, will kind of be pretty pivotal when we come to write the story of the first term, or the term of the Starmer government, is rebellion isn't something that MPs tend to do once. There have been research on this, that once an MP has rebelled once, they're more likely to do it again. There are a number of reasons for that. One reason, I think, is that, you had 126 Labour MPs, many of whom had been very quiet and well behaved up until this point, some less so, but most of them have been very much on board. And what have they learnt from this? They have learnt that they have the numbers if they cooperate, and that they can force really big government changes. Now, there may be a cost to that. I think Starmer's authority is really damaged by that, and they may decide further on in the Parliament that actually they don't want to risk it. But once you learn as an MP that you can enact real change even if you're a backbencher, that's not something that you just forget about and sit down quietly on. And I think that if you look at when the big rebellions came in previous governments, it was a trend. It was very difficult to then go back and say, no, we're all very much on message now. And to have that level of disquiet and that level of power from the backbenchers enacted so early in a parliament is quite a worrying sign. It's going to take something quite big, I think, for Starmer to get them back on board.
Yeah, well, the prizes for guessing what's going to be all over the front pages of the papers tomorrow. It's going to be this. It's going to be this retreat, this climb down, this gaping hole in the welfare reform programme forced upon the government. Just a reminder then, at 10:30 every night on Times Radio, you get a first look at the big stories as we go through the next day's papers, the front pages. Team of expert reviewers, Karen Walker every Monday to Wednesday, Henry Bonsey Thursday and Friday, or Darren Morris at the weekend. You get the front pages at 10:30 here on Times Radio. So do tune into us here on Times Radio and get a head start on tomorrow's headlines. Now, we're going to be talking about America. There's a right old tangle going on in Washington, D.C. We're going to catch up on all of that. It's 6:30 here on Pienaar and Friends on Times Radio with Barclays Business Banking. Grow your business. Bank on Barclays.
banking. Find out how Barclays can help to move your business forward. Search Barclays Business.
And Rachel Cunliffe's here with me on Pienaar Friends. So is Tim Montgomerie. And here's Kate to tell us about what she's up to after 7.
Yeah, John. So we are going to be taking the vote on the reasoned amendment. So we'll understand the size of discontent over the government's welfare bill. There are concerns. There are rumours going around that the government may pull it completely because a lot of MPs are standing up in the House and saying, I don't know what I'm voting for anymore. No. It's been such a mess. So, yeah, essentially, there is a lot of discontent. There's a lot of confusion. Liz Kendall said no more changes, no more adjustments to the timeline of this. And then the next minute, Stephen Timms is saying, well, we're going to delay the implementation of the change of eligibility criteria on PIP for new applicants until his review is done. It is a mess, John, and there are a number of Labour MPs stood up in the House right now. We're keeping a really close eye on it behind the scenes, who are saying so. And it's pretty extraordinary, I have to say. So, look, we assume that it will go through at second reading. We assume that there'll be not enough support for that wrecking amendment for it to do what it was intended to do. But there could be a significant amount of abstentions. That will affect what happens. We know that there are around 40 or 50 or so Labour MPs will vote for the amendment to try and wreck the government's welfare bill. But it's a really confused picture, and it's not getting better as every half an hour goes by, I have to say.
The government must be in panic because they wouldn't have made that last-minute announcement from Stephen Timms if they weren't really expecting or fearing that there could be defeat.
Yeah, because it basically looks embarrassing if your Work and Pensions Secretary, who is generally very well regarded by most MPs and also by leadership too, if she's saying one thing 1 minute and then she's been contradicted the next, it undermines her authority, it undermines the work she's been doing, it undermines the work of the whips as well. Yeah. So no one's in a great situation over this. Of course, it is important to get this legislation right, and that should be the main outcome of this. But the way that this is being conducted, it is not a good day at all for Keir Starmer. And I wonder whether we'll start to hear, various commentary that it's Keir Starmer's worst day in office so far. It's just a mess. It's a scrambled mess at the moment.
And not what he wanted 2 days, 3 days before his big anniversary, 1 year in office.
No. Absolutely not.
Well, now there's less than 20 minutes, just over 20 minutes before the vote is due to take place, which is going to be filled up from around about now with what they call the wind-ups. We'll have the opposition front bench. Then we'll hear Stephen Timms with that final speech of the day before calling on MPs to support the bill. Now we'll see what he has to say. What gloss it's possible to put on the mess that's engulfed this whole plan. Anyway, we're going to be watching that. We're going to be dipping back over to the Commons as the Minister gets to his feet and listening to what it is that he has to say.
We'll be taking the vote live. Theo Usherwood is in lobby for us. He'll be grabbing MPs as they come through. We've got the Shadow Chancellor Mel Stride with us after 7:30. So there's plenty of coverage. We'll be looking also at those arrests in the Lucy Letby case as well today, and we'll talk about a few other stories as well, but a big focus on this welfare bill because if the government had hoped that we'd stop talking about it and MPs would get on and vote for it, then they've been usurped.
All right. And when Stephen Timms gets to his feet in the middle of this, crisis is the most overused word in politics, but it's another one. When he gets to his feet, we're going to be watching and listening to that. I promise you, you'll miss none of that. We will cross over to the comments for any key element in that minister's speech. Now, let's just nip across west now and see what's going on in Washington, D.C., because an awful lot's been going on there. The Big Beautiful Bill is what it was called. That is until the leading Democrat, Chuck Schumer, got up in the United States Senate and said, let's not call it that. And somehow he managed to pull that off. It's not called the Big Beautiful Bill anymore, which was the title that was given to it by President Trump. It's waiting to go through, and as that happens, it'll head on its way down to the lower house, the House of Representatives. But there'll be more battling and struggling to go on in the lower house too. This bill, it's divided. The Republican Party, it's certainly divided American politics. And it is also, it's a journey to a large extent into the unknown. You've got Elon Musk now, who's renewed his feud his fiery feud with President Trump, with all that might mean. Unless, of course, it doesn't. So let's welcome now back to the programme, as always, Molly Ball from the Wall Street Journal. Hello to you, Molly.
Hello to you, John.
Molly,
happy Tuesday.
It's the happy Tuesday. I mean, how happy do things look on Capitol Hill right now? Where are we with the bill? How do you even have a name now, Molly?
It actually is formally called the One Big Beautiful Bill Act. They ended up just giving it the official name after that moniker that Trump had assigned to it, which seems appropriate since it is sort of a grab bag of different provisions, mostly budget related. But what has just happened in the last hour is that it has finally passed the Senate after a really grueling overnight Senate session that featured basically all day and all night. The members of the Senate have been offering amendments and negotiating and wrangling and going back and forth as the Senate Majority Leader John Thune tries to get just enough votes to pass the bill. And finally, they did hold the vote. I think there were some senators and others holding their breath when that happened. It really was not clear, even at the last minute, if he had the votes to pass. These had been some very tough negotiations, and he had lost 2 votes with others up for grabs, but they did pass it. It was 50-50 in the Senate, which means that the Vice President, J.D. Vance, can break the tie, which he did. So the final vote was 51-50. But it's not over yet. No. It has not passed yet. It now has to go back to the House. They have to approve it. This is after it already only passed the House earlier by a 1-vote margin, and the Senate has changed it substantially, which is going to set that delicate balance between the different wings of the party off kilter, and it is now an open question what the House is going to do with it.
Yeah, I mean, it's a great big open question. It's a mighty great pantechnicon of a bill. It carries on the existing tax cuts. It adds to them. It means no tax on tips and I think car insurance and overtime. That was the sort of election-winning stuff that Donald Trump chucked in before the election. And then you've got these savings, these cuts in welfare provision, Medicaid, health insurance for very many Americans, and including, of course, migrants. Some of them have been in America for many, many, many years, which is, that pantechnicon nature means it's come under fire from, well, just on the Republican side, from senators from every direction, fiscal hawks, those who didn't like the cuts in medical insurance. And there's going to be more of the same then, Molly. There'll be another split in the GOP in the House.
That's right. This bill, as you say, continues the 2017 Trump tax cuts, which were sort of the major accomplishment of his first term in office legislatively. And that has been a big talking point for the president and his allies, that because the tax cuts that were enacted in 2017 had a sunset, had an expiration date, if the Congress doesn't finish passing this bill, those tax cuts will expire at the beginning of next year. So every American who pays federal income taxes would see a tax increase if this bill or something like it doesn't pass to extend those tax cuts further. But that's very expensive. And the independent analysts, including the in-house analysts of the Congress, have concluded that this bill will add trillions of dollars to the deficit. Now, it does cut some spending, but nowhere near the amount of spending to offset those expensive tax cuts. And the spending cuts are primarily achieved by cutting the Medicaid healthcare program for low-income people. This is already a program that is not available to illegal immigrants. And there's been some additions to eligibility to it. Some work requirements that opponents of the bill say are just going to serve to kick people off of their health insurance. And some analysts have estimated that more than 10 million people could lose their health care. And one political concern that's been raised is that due to the way Donald Trump in particular has reshaped the Republican coalition to make it more a party that depends on the votes of lower income working class voters, there are a lot of Trump voters on Medicaid who might be displeased by the passage of this bill if it does come to pass that millions of people lose their health insurance.
Right, which has got some Republicans worried about their future when it comes to the midterm elections, upsetting many of their constituents. And on the other side, you've got the fiscal hawks who don't like the amount of debt that's being stacked up. And, well, no one bigger really than Elon Musk, who's now chimed in. He's threatened to to start his own party as and when this bill goes through, threatened to pour his money into the fight against those who vote in favour of this legislation. I wonder how scared Republicans are about that. Well, we'll ask one. Jim Nicholson, former Republican National Committee chairman, who's on the line. Hello to you.
Hi.
Hello to you. Welcome to the show. Thank you for joining us. Let me ask you first about Elon Musk threatening to use his mighty wealth as a weapon against anyone, I guess especially Republicans, who vote in favour of this legislation and stack up debt. Is that a frightening prospect to you?
I have a lot of respect for Musk for what he has done, but he's really kind of a political neophyte and ham-handed in many ways, but a relevant sort of person in our country and our culture, given what he's done technology-wise. But he doesn't have a big following, and I don't have much fear of a third-party movement in the U.S. They just don't get legs anymore. Yeah. The parties have really established themselves at the grassroots, and they have a solid organization. It'd be very hard to penetrate that. But he's a voice, and I think he's a useful voice, because I think the deficits and the debt are major problems for us.
Yeah.
We now pay more in interest on our debt than we do on defense.
Yeah, look,
we need to be spending more on defense.
Yeah,
in my opinion.
He clearly is a political neophyte, but he's a political neophyte with hundreds of billions of dollars to his name, and he used a lot of that wealth to help President Trump and the Republican Party achieve what they achieved at the last general election. If that becomes your enemy, that's going to be a problem come midterms, isn't it? Now, maybe Donald Trump can make it up with him again. But as things stand, it's the last thing you need at the moment is another feud with Musk's billions lined up against you.
Well, it's a long time till November 26, and I don't think Musk is going to be very cozy with the Democrat Party, which are much bigger spenders than we are, and the debt and the deficit bothers them less than it does the Republicans, even though it bothers this Republican too much because it's too high. But I'm not losing any sleep over Musk politically. I mean, it'd be better if he was aligned with the president, because he's an important figure, and he's been very good to NASA, for example, and his aspirations in space and his efficiencies and the technology that he's achieved, as well as he started a car company from scratch at the same time he started a space company, and there are very few people could ever achieve that. So he's a very respected sort of figure on that basis, and he has an audience, so people listen to him. But when it comes time to cast the votes, I mean, in November of 26, it's going to depend on the economy of the United States, and we'll see what the price of eggs are, and gasoline, and rent. And that's what's going to tell the tale.
A week, as they say, is a long time in politics. Tim Montgomerie and Rachel Cunliffe are here with me. Tim.
Mr. Nicholson, I think I was at the 2000 Pennsylvania Republican Convention, which I remember you speaking at, and I just some years ago, and the context though, how many bills have been passed since that time by Democrats and Republicans, which have added trillions of dollars to your debt and your borrowing. And I just wonder, I remember in 2000, the Republicans were much more the party of fiscal responsibility. Do you think there's any chance of that party returning to America?
I hope so. It should. It's not easy. I mean, given the need that we have to strengthen and bolster our defense budgets, which, that's very expensive. The technology is expensive, but in my opinion, very necessary. It's very difficult to roll back, these entitlement programs that are put on the books, and the Biden administration just opened the floodgate for, Medicaid to working or non-working young people that, heretofore haven't had Medicaid, didn't really need Medicaid, student loans. And so when you try to constrict that, it's a political challenge, it's a public relations challenge, and you have to find enough politicians that have enough backbone that will dig in and do that, and it's not easy politically.
All right.
It's a conundrum, but it's one that the Republican Party needs to face because it's just gotten too high, and the interest on it.
Okay, well, Jim Nicholson, I've got to say, your politics is a daily fascination to us. It is unpredictable. It is turbulent. On both of those counts, it generally outstrips even our own. Except this evening, I think we're putting up a pretty good show of rivaling American politics here at Westminster. Jim Nicholson, former Republican National Committee Chair, thank you so much for joining us. And always, thank you so much for dropping by, Molly Bull. I'm going to pull away from the American story for a moment now, and you'll understand why when I say that the Disability and Social Security Minister, Stephen Timms, has risen to his feet in the House of Commons. Let us hear what he has to say. What is the closing stage, final stage of this second reading debate, the first obstacle facing this bill, about what the government's done and decided not to do.
Full debate. We have heard, Madam Deputy Speaker, the concerns, and the government will amend the bill, as my right honourable friend and I have set out. But the system we've inherited does not work. Uniquely in the G7, our employment rate is still less than before the pandemic. Every other G7 country has got back to where it was before or better, but we haven't. And the system is trapping hundreds of thousands of people needlessly in low income and inactivity. The system tells people they cannot work, for many of whom it is simply untrue. We have to change it. I'll gladly give way to Michael.
I'm sorry to come in so early in this peroration, but we have limited time. Could we have the assurance that the concession that's been given this evening with regard to the Timms review, that the outcome and recommendations of the Timms review will be in primary legislation and not delegated legislation?
Well, I'm grateful to my right honourable friend. And let me just say a little bit about the announcement I made in my intervention on my honourable friend, the member for Peterborough, earlier on. So we've listened to the concerns that have been expressed in the debate, specifically about the new 4-point threshold being implemented before the outcome of my review. So, as I've said, we will, in fact, now move straight to my review, only make changes to PIP eligibility activities and descriptors following that review. We will table... I will give way, yeah.
I thank my right honourable friend for giving way. Can I ask the Minister to confirm at the dispatch box that Clause 5, specifically referencing the need for claimants to score 4 points in order to receive the daily living allowance, will be removed from the bill?
Yes, I can confirm to my honourable friend that that is the case, and we will table the amendment to do that. And let me also say and answer the honourable member from South Antrim, who raised this point perfectly properly in the debate, that we will also remove the parallel provisions for Northern Ireland. Now, he suggested that would mean removing Clause 6. It doesn't mean that, because there's a lot of other things in Schedule 2, which is referenced in Clause 6. It's Section 4 of Schedule 2 which addresses the points that we're dealing with. Let me just make a little further progress, Madam Deputy Speaker. And actually, I still haven't quite answered the intervention that my right honourable friend, the question that he put to me in the first place. And this question about whether the review, the outcome of the review, will be implemented in primary or secondary legislation does depend on the outcome of the review and the form of the assessment that we take forward. And we'll come back to that. We will come back to that when we've concluded the review. Let me make a little bit of headway before I intervene again. But, Madam Deputy Speaker, under the last Labour government, in the 12 years up to 2010, the disability employment gap fell steadily. In 2010, as soon as the Tories and the Lib Dems took over and scrapped the New Deal, it stopped falling.
We're going to put away there from the House of Commons the final stage of this second reading debate. Second reading being, well, it's the first occasion to look at the bill in the hole, and the bill has now got a hole in it, which is where the personal independence payments proposals were. And we just heard there Stephen Timms wrapping up this debate, telling us that yes, the PIP, the PIPs, a part of this is being taken away. The rule that would have made it tougher to receive those payments is being removed. He's going to be listening to the objections from MPs and not giving a commitment that there may be another piece of primary legislation, another full bill bringing in the welfare reforms later on down the line. His hope is that is enough, for what it's worth, to get MPs behind the bill as it stands, what is left of it. We'll see what remains of that. We're calling it a rebellion. There's some we can discuss that semantic right now. But what remains of the bill we'll know in the space of about the next 25 minutes or so. They'll call the vote in 6 minutes' time. They'll go through the lobbies. They will then come back and we will hear those numbers. And we'll have it with Kate Borsay in her show here on Times Radio. So do stick with us, and as ever, I promise you will miss absolutely nothing. It's a struggle, this, isn't it? I mean, Rachel, this is an unenviable position for Stephen Timms, who's thought of as generally as a safe pair of hands. He's going to need them.
He's thought of a safe pair of hands. He's also very well liked in the Commons, and I think this would be going differently, even worse for the government if there was somebody else trying to bring it forward. And you can hear him then answering questions that very valid questions from MPs about whether it's going to be primary legislation, when they're going to get to know what it is exactly that they're voting on. And he's doing a great job, but it's quite clear that he doesn't actually have the answers to those questions, just as Liz Kendall didn't either when she was speaking earlier. Okay,
get your final thoughts on this at this stage from you, Rachel, and from you, Tim Montgomerie, here on Pienaar and Friends with Barclays Business Banking. Find out how Barclays can help move your business forward. Search Barclays Business.
Wait.
Tim Montgomerie is here with me in the closing stages of Pienaar and Friends, and for the closing final stages of the welfare reform bill in the House of Commons. Rachel Cunliffe here too. There's nothing about this, Tim, is going to feel like an opportunity for the government. It's a mess, but in one sense, there's an opportunity to, as they sort of struggle towards the next stage of this and try to come up with something more coherent by way of a welfare plan, and frankly the bar is not high for that, to try to carry the public with them as well as MPs. It's an argument which they hasn't really had with the public so far. That's one of the failings that we've seen so far, and they have at least an opening, a chink of light in the deep darkness to try to do some of that, Tim.
Well, Rachel said a few minutes ago that she thought this might be one of the events in the history of this government that will be remembered for a long time. And I think that's right. But the government has a choice now. It is still only year one. This parliament is still young. What will they do now? Will they try and muddle on and carry on as they've been doing? Because in a way, this period of Starmer government reminds me an awful lot of the period of Sunak government that it replaced. Constant relaunches, constant sort of churn of announcements, but no follow-through on anything. will they now pause and decide what 3 or 4 priorities they have and invest properly in those priorities, understand them, plan them, bring backbenchers on side, or will they carry on trying to do everything and succeeding in doing nothing? And it's July, it's hot, they're going to have a recess very soon. They need to use that recess wisely because the dreaded word reset is needed for the sake of the country as well as the party. And they need to take this opportunity to do something very different when they come back in the autumn.
And Rachel, as well as the argument which kicks off now about welfare reform and its eventual shape, there'll also be another economic argument, won't there? Because if the government wants to buy itself more political space, there are going to be plenty of people saying you've got to buy yourself more economic space too. And they're going to be saying to the Chancellor, now, will you now think again about your fiscal straitjacket?
Yeah, it's going to be a summer of talking about tax rises, I think, is going to be the general theme. We're going to come back in the autumn for the budget, and the only question anyone is going to have for Rachel Reeves is, are the fiscal rules going, or is the commitment not to raise tax going? Because you can't have both.
Okay, as the House of Commons now, they're calling the vote now. You are going to get the vote in about 15-20 minutes time. That's it from us. Angus Mitchell was our producer. Isaac Marley was on the keyboards. I'm back tomorrow, and Kate's up next with the continuing story at Westminster. Stay with us. This is Times Radio.
Across the UK, on DAB digital radio, online and on your smart speaker. This is Times Radio, the voice of the Times.
Thanks, John. Have a great night. It is 7 o'clock. This is Kate Borsay and the Evening Edition.
I can announce
coming up
that we will move straight to the wider review and only make changes to PIP eligibility, activities and descriptors following that review.
The government has given in to rebel MPs over the welfare bill. Stay tuned as we take those votes live and get reaction from Parliament, from Labour and the Shadow Chancellor this evening. 3 former bosses at the hospital where Lucy Letby worked have been arrested. What could that mean for her case? And the UK's chief rabbi has told The Times the BBC needs a change of direction over how it tackles anti-Semitism. We'll speak to the Vice President of the Board of Deputies of British Jews as well tonight. All eyes on that welfare reform bill, though. First, let's get the full news headlines from Nick Ellaby.
Thanks, Kate. Good evening. MPs are about to vote on an amendment to the government's welfare bill ahead of a vote on the bill itself. Sir Keir Starmer has already abandoned the key element of his welfare reforms entirely in the face of a mass rebellion by Labour MPs. It's led by York Central MP Rachel Maskell.
I cannot cross by on the other side for one, let alone for the 150,000 who will be pushed further into poverty. And as so many of us fear, and as the evidence shows, since 600 people took their lives under the Tories' brutal reforms, the tragedy of this ideology could be worse.
The government had planned to change eligibility criteria for disability benefits for all new claimants from November 2026, but the new system will now be delayed until a review by Sir Stephen Timms, the Welfare Minister, has concluded. The review could lead to a fundamental overhaul of the way people are assessed for benefits. Labour's Andy MacDonald has been speaking in the Commons ahead of tonight's vote.
We've just heard that a pivotal part of this bill, Clause 5, is not going to be effective. So I ask the question, what are we supposed to be voting on tonight? Is it the bill as drawn or another bill? Because I'm confused, and I think people in this chamber will need that clarification.
3 senior leaders at the hospital where Lucy Letby worked have been questioned over gross negligence manslaughter. The nurse was convicted of killing 7 babies and trying to murder 7 more at the Countess of Chester. A 92-year-old man's been sentenced for the rape and murder of an elderly widow in Bristol in 1967.
You will never be released. You will die in prison. You can go down.
The judge, Mr Justice Sweeting, just after he told Rylan Headley he'll serve at least 20 years in jail. During the trial, Bristol Crown Court heard the then 34-year-old got into Louisa Dunn's home by forcing a window open. He then attacked and strangled the 75-year-old. It's thought to be the UK's longest-running cold case to be solved. Police have arrested 2 people after activists from a soon-to-be-banned group poured red paint over the entrance to an arms maker's site. Members of Palestine Action blocked the entrance of Elbit Systems in Bristol. The number of births in England and Wales rose last year for the first time since 2021. It's thought to be driven in part by a notable jump in babies to fathers over 60. By contrast, births to young mums and dads fell. Nearly 595,000 live births were registered in 2024, an increase of 0.6% on the year before. Now let's get the latest from the markets.
Times Radio Market Watch in association with Saxo. Invest in everything in one place and at low prices with Saxo Investor. Capital at risk.
The FTSE 100 closed down 38 points at 8,760. The FTSE 250 closed down 89 points at 21,626. The Dow Jones is currently up 97 points at 43,916. The pound's trading at €1.17 and $1.37. And Michael Shanks, the energy minister, is demanding an investigation into the collapse of Prax Lindsey oil refinery. He said there had been long-standing issues with the company. Workers had been badly let down. There's much more on the business section of the Times website.
Times Radio Market Watch in association with Saxo. Invest in everything in one place and at low prices with Saxo Investor. Capital at risk.
Across the UK, on DAB Digital Radio, on the Times Radio app, and on your smart speaker. The Evening Edition with Kate Balsey.
You have given us a clear mandate, and we will use it to deliver change.
This is a marathon, not a sprint.
There is a buzz, there is an energy, there is an optimism. To restore service and respect to politics.
We are the generation that will take the NHS from the worst crisis in its history to build an NHS fit for the future.
I will not rest until we have delivered the strong, safe and prosperous America that our children deserve.
Our first responsibility is to hold this Labour government to account.
It is the Evening Edition here on Times Radio with me, Kate Balsey. 3 hours of news, politics and thought-provoking conversation. We've got some fresh stories to bring you as well, getting you ahead of tomorrow's news agenda. We are creating tomorrow's news agenda on the show tonight because this evening, imminently, you'll get a significant indication on the amount of discontent within the Labour Party over the government's welfare bill, such as the panic within the party's leadership over the bill passing. There have been more last-minute concessions. Not long ago, the Minister Stephen Timms said the new criteria for claiming disability benefits would not be implemented before his review into PIP is complete. Labour MPs have been standing up on the floor of the Commons this afternoon saying that there have been so many changes, they now don't know what they're voting for. It's a complete mess. Some have even called for the bill to be pulled entirely. There is a vote going on right now, though, on the rebel amendment. OK, how many Labour MPs will support or abstain? We'll keep an eye and we'll go to the Commons live with Theo Usherwood, our political correspondent, for the vote result on that rebel amendment and then the second reading of the bill. And after 7:30, we'll speak to the Shadow Chancellor Mel Stride. There'll be plenty more reaction throughout the show as well. I think to sum it up, there is a huge amount of concern over the mess that's been created, the toing and froing, the changes made to this welfare bill. It doesn't signal a great 12-month anniversary for Keir Starmer. Elsewhere this evening, we'll bring you what you need to know as 3 members of the senior leadership team at the hospital where Lucy Letby worked have been arrested on suspicion of gross negligence manslaughter. And the Vice President of the Board of Deputies of British Jews will join us and tell us what action the BBC should face over their failure to limit the exposure of Bob Vylan's Glastonbury set. We've got our usual peek inside tomorrow's paper, and Michael Binion, the Times' former diplomatic editor, and Colin Brazier, the former news anchor, will join us to digest the big stories of the day after 9. Do stay with us. If you'd like to get in touch, 0333 003 2353 to WhatsApp us. You can also tweet us at Times Radio or drop us a text 87222. Start your message with the word Times.
The Evening Edition with Kate Balsey.
Well, it is 7 minutes past 7. MPs are voting on an amendment to the government's welfare bill before voting on the bill itself. It comes after Sir Keir Starmer abandoned the flagship element of his welfare reforms after backlash from Labour rebels. Here's Disability Minister Stephen Timms making the announcement earlier.
I want to make this point to him that he and others across the House during this debate have raised concerns that the changes to PIP are coming ahead of the conclusions of the review of the assessment that I will be leading. We've heard those concerns, and that is why I can announce that we are going to remove the Clause 5 from the bill at committee, that we will move straight to the wider review, sometimes referred to as the Tim's review, and only make changes to PIP eligibility activities and descriptors following that review.
Well, that was the Disability Minister Stephen Timms there. Let's speak to Times Radio's political correspondent Theo Usherwood. He's in Parliament for us this evening. Theo, hello.
A very good evening, Kate.
Thanks, Theo. Gosh, it has turned into a bit of a mess, one might have to say. Whilst we wait on the results of the vote to the amendment to the welfare bill, this signals how much discontent there is. Just take us through the day so far, because we started in one position, or the welfare bill started in one position, and it's ended before these crucial votes in quite another. Just take us through it.
Yes, this story actually began last night when Liz Kendall gave a statement updating the House of Commons about the changes that she'd been making to the welfare bill and what was going to be presented before MPs at second reading today and then next week at committee stage. And a number of Labour MPs who were concerned about the bill, Kate, raised a concern that, in effect, what was being created was a three-tier system. So we have existing claimants of PIP who are going to be entitled to their same PIP payments that they would already be entitled to because of the concessions that would be made. We're then going to have a system where new claimants of PIP were going to see their benefits cut by as much as half what existing claimants are entitled to. And then we were going to have a third tier, which would be PIP claimants claiming whatever Stephen Timms, as part of his review, which is due to be published in November next year, said that PIP claimants should be entitled to. And Liz Kendall stood up in the dispatch box as Labour MP after Labour MP raised this concern and batted them away. But their concerns haven't gone away. In fact, the rebellion, only 39 Labour MPs had signed the reasoned amendment overnight, but many more, from speaking to MPs in the Commons this afternoon, are believed actually to have been backing those Labour rebels, forming part of a cohort, very unhappy. Angela Rayner's been seen around looking fairly stony-faced, the Deputy Prime Minister. She's been brought in to try and assuage the rebels and persuade them not to go ahead. But we can only be left with the conclusion that actually, despite having done a huge amount of the groundwork last week, the government was still facing a defeat this tonight, were they not to take this decision to cave in further. And the net effect of what they've decided to do by, in effect, putting it off, any changes off until Stephen Timms has reported in November next year, is to basically their bill is back to square one. It is worthless. And we're now in a situation where Rachel Reeves, the Chancellor, is going to have to find £5 billion worth of cuts that she'd already earmarked as part of list legislation from somewhere else. And that most probably will mean tax rises. They'll have to come from tax rises in the autumn, or if she can find somehow miraculously cuts from elsewhere.
OK, we are keeping an eye on the Commons. The result will be imminent on this rebel amendment to the government's welfare bill. As what we're looking out here for, Theo, is the number of MPs who vote with this amendment. Let's just explain what we are anticipating, and also the number of abstentions could be significant as well.
Yes, a lot of people are talking about abstentions. In the current day and age, it's actually quite difficult to know completely whether somebody has abstained, because, of course, they may have been paired, which basically means being teamed up with somebody from the opposite side and give an excuse for missing tonight's vote. But it is a three-line whip. So, yes, there will be we can expect a number of abstentions.
OK, Theo, we are going to go live to the vote now, and we'll come back to you afterwards.
The ayes to the right, 149. The noes to the left, 328. The noes have it. The noes have it. Unlock. The question is that the bill be now read a second time. As many of that opinion say aye? Aye. Does the contrary no? No! The lobby.
OK, Theo, just explain what we had there then. 149 ayes, so yeses, and 328 noes.
So a clear win for the government, by a majority for the government there of 289. It's unclear. I don't think the Tories, from what I understand, the Tories weren't going to vote for the amendment to kill the bill. The key, but what Kemi Badenoch has said is that she is going to vote against the bill at second reading. This is the vote that's coming up now. So we're expecting this vote that's about to happen to be much closer, because it's going to include Conservative MPs in voting as well. So it's a clear majority of 289, if my mathematics is correct, a win for the government. And that was, of course, on the amendment put forward by Rachel Maskell, supported on paper by 39 other Labour MPs this morning, which in effect would kill the bill by declining to give it a second reading. We're now coming on to the substantive motion, which is a vote on the bill at second reading. And it's likely, given what Kemi Badenoch has said previously, where the Conservatives are going to be whipped to vote against the government because they don't think that actually the cuts to welfare, according to Kemi Badenoch, go far enough, but actually this is going to be a vote that's going to be much closer. OK,
all right, so that's what's happening now. We are going to get the vote on the second reading, and as you say, expected to be much closer, because this will include the Conservatives voting as well, Reform MPs too. We don't know about the makeup of those yeses yet, do we, Theo? So we can't confidently say how many Labour MPs went with Rachel Maskell's rebel amendment.
Well, we know that there are 400 Labour MPs. OK, so if the Tories, we would presume from looking at these numbers, it's the Tories who are missing that have abstained. So if we're looking at the fact that 328 MPs have voted, we can assume that the vast majority of those 328 are Labour MPs. So that would leave about, by my calculation, 73 Labour MPs who have either abstained or voted with the rebels. That is still a sizable rebellion, but we can't automatically assume those 73 MPs would automatically fall into the 149 who have voted against. That's where there will be some abstentions, and of course and it's just worth taking this into account, be some MPs who, due to exceptional family circumstances or other commitments, and I say exceptional because this is a three-line whip, will have been given an excuse.
OK. Let me just run one talking point by you, Theo, if I can. Just before we had the results of the vote, just before voting took place, actually, Stephen Timms, the minister concerned, the disability minister, declined to guarantee that future changes to PIP will be in primary legislation, meaning that MPs can amend them. So what we have here, effectively, and I'm just trying to sort of see sense in that. Does that further ridicule this a little bit? Universal credit and personal independence payment not going to have any clauses about actual PIP?
I think it will cause concern that, and this is, for instance,
we've just lost our connection to Theo Usherwood there. He is in lobby at the moment in the Houses of Parliament. We've had the first vote, the rebel amendment vote, which Starmer has easily won with a majority of 179, defeated by 328 votes to 149, so a majority of 179. I think Theo's back with us. Theo?
Yeah, is it?
Oh, we've lost him again, I think. House of Parliament, not famed for its brilliant internet, I have to say, which is utterly remarkable on many levels, isn't it? But we'll go to Theo again as soon as we establish connection with him. So what's going on at the moment is that MPs are voting on the second reading. This is expected to be much closer, as Theo Usherwood has said. This is on the government's welfare bill. There's been an almighty change of mind. It's turned into a bit of a mess this afternoon. Theo, are you back with us?
I'm back with you. Can you hear me?
Yes. So just elaborate on on that point about future PIP changes, Tim's has declined to guarantee that they'll be in primary legislation, meaning that MPs can amend them.
Yes. So what Stephen Timms is saying is if of course it's in primary legislation, then any changes can be voted on. I'm sure Labour MPs will potentially be concerned that if the government were to in future use such an instrument to bring about changes to PIP, then they would do so without necessarily facing the scrutiny of Parliament. And that would cause, I would imagine, a huge amount of concern amongst Labour MPs if the government were to try, rather than face the scrutiny they have over the last week or so, to make changes to the PIP payments without those changes going before Parliament in a vote like we've just seen, or we're going to see both today and in the coming week. And this has, of course, been a humiliation for the government, and it's going to be a humiliation when the vote gets to second reading, because despite the best efforts of the whips, despite the best efforts of people like Angela Rayner, the Deputy Prime Minister, in trying to bring round the rebels, the Labour backbenchers, and we've heard this throughout the afternoon, and we heard it yesterday from other Labour MPs, the likes of Rachel Maskell, Mary Tipple, are incensed that they see a Labour government and the principles of a Labour government, as they see it, implementing changes to the PIP payments, which affect the poorest. And even by the government's own estimations, 150,000 people are still going to be in poverty who wouldn't otherwise be in poverty as a result of these changes.
Look, Theo, thank you. We're going to come back to you as soon as we get the result of the vote on the second reading of the government's welfare bill. That's Theo Usherwood. He is at the Houses of Parliament. He's in lobby for us at the moment. And at the moment, MPs, as I said, are voting on the second reading of the welfare bill. That rebel amendment, by the way, which would have really kiboshed the whole bill if it had been supported, was defeated with a majority of 179. So that one didn't come to fruition. But it's certainly been a topsy-turvy kind of day. There have been concessions offered by this government, a last-minute concession about the fact that changes to PIP, to welfare, will not come into place until the conclusion of a review by Stephen Timms, the welfare minister. That changed at the last minute as well. It's not been a thoroughly enjoyable day, I'm sure, for Keir Starmer. There's more from us. We're keeping our eyes across that vote. We'll come to you with it live as soon as we get it. This is Kate Borsay and the Evening Edition.
Times Radio Breakfast with Kate McCann and Stig Abel.
As the dust settles on the result of the welfare bill vote, we will ask what next for Prime Minister Keir Starmer and his government.
Are we allowed to call them Jedwina?
If you like.
Every Wednesday here on Times Radio Breakfast, Giles Corrin and Edwina Curry will be talking about the news, and they'll probably make us ask the question, is there really extraterrestrial life out there? It's World UFO Day, and we're probably going to have to talk about that.
Times Radio Breakfast with Kate McCann and Stig Abel. Tomorrow morning from 6 on Times Radio.
Here's the truth about AI. AI is only as powerful as the platform it's built into. ServiceNow puts AI to work for people across your business, removing friction and frustration for your employees, supercharging productivity for your developers, providing intelligent tools for your service agents to make customers happier. All built into a single platform you can use right now. That's why the world works with ServiceNow. Visit servicenow.com/UK/AI for people.
The £5 meal deal from McDonald's. Get a cheeseburger or mayo chicken, medium fries, 4 McNuggets and a medium soft drink for guess what? That's right, £5. Yeah! It's not called the £5 meal deal for nothing. From 11 a.m. Not available on delivery. Carbonated soft drink upgrade fees apply. Participating restaurants subject to availability.
Listen to Times Radio on your DAB digital radio.
The Evening Edition with Kate Borsay.
Thanks for being with us. It is the Evening Edition. We are at the moment waiting for the result as MPs vote on the second reading of the welfare bill. Earlier, MPs defeated the rebel amendment with a majority of 179. So Rachel Maskell and Meg Hillier's rebel amendment was not passed. It was defeated. But what could happen next is a much closer tussle between MPs and, of course, the government to try and get this welfare bill through to third reading, through to the next stage. Whilst we wait for that to come through, and Theo Usherwood is at the House of Parliament for us, just waiting for that to come through. Let's cover one of the other top stories of the day. Now, 3 former bosses of the hospital where Lucy Letby worked have been arrested on suspicion of gross negligence manslaughter. They were questioned by police and have all been released on bail. Lucy Letby was convicted of murdering 7 babies and attempting to murder a further 7 and is serving life in prison. But her case is being considered by the Criminal Cases Review Commission. Let's talk to policing, crime and justice commentator Danny Shaw, who joins us. Danny, good evening.
Good evening, Kate. Hi.
So what do we know as a result of today? How has the story moved on, Danny?
Well, this is a significant development in this case. It does not affect Lucy Letby's convictions in any way. She is still in prison serving those life sentences for murder and attempted murder, and she is still protesting her innocence, and her case, as you said, is with the Criminal Cases Review Commission, which has the power to refer it back to the Court of Appeal. That's a process that is likely to take many months. But what this is about is a related investigation that was launched in October 2023 by Cheshire Police. They launched an inquiry into corporate manslaughter, focusing on the senior leadership at the Countess of Chester Hospital and the decision-making that was made by executives then to determine if there was any criminality because of the rise in deaths of babies on the neonatal unit. Well, in March this year, Cheshire Police then expanded their inquiry to look at gross negligence manslaughter. That is, actions which are assessed to be grossly negligent or individuals who haven't acted and whose actions could constitute gross negligence manslaughter as a result. So as a result of that inquiry, yesterday, 3 people were arrested, 3 people from the senior leadership team at the time in 2015-2016 at that hospital. They have been arrested. They were released on police bail, so there have no charges been brought at the moment. The inquiry is continuing while they are on police bail, and there have been no timescale set for the inquiry into the gross negligence manslaughter allegations or the corporate manslaughter inquiry either. So the investigation goes on.
OK, we are, I think, going to leave it there, Danny, if that's OK, because we're about to go again live to the House of Commons for this vote on the government's welfare bill at second reading. So we'll leave that there as you've summed it up so nicely. Danny Shaw, thank you, policing, crime and justice commentator. All eyes on the House of Commons. We're about to get the results. MPs have been voting for the government's controversial welfare bill. That was after MPs defeated that rebel amendment earlier. And we will go to this live as soon as we've got it. Here we go.
The ayes to the right, 335. The noes to the left, 260.
The ayes to the right, 335. The noes to the left, 260. So the ayes have it, unlock.
OK, let's go to Theo Usherwood, Times Radio's political correspondent, who at the moment is in lobby. So it definitely was tighter, wasn't it, Theo, this one?
Yes, it was much tighter. We've got a majority there of, by my calculations, 75, which, of course, is much tighter than what we usually see in votes where we have a government with a working majority of north of 160. In the previous vote, we've just got the breakdown of the rebels actually, Kate, and this is on the reasoned amendment. There were 44 Labour MPs who voted for that reasoned amendment put forward by Rachel Maskell to kill the legislation stone dead. That's 42 in the lobbies and then another 2 tellers in the House of Commons. This time around, of course, as I was saying earlier, the vote much closer because Conservatives voted against giving this bill a second reading in the House of Commons, but the government nonetheless have got it over the line, but it's come at a huge price. In effect, this legislation has been watered down from what we saw when it was announced by Rachel Reeves, the Chancellor, back in the spring statement on March 26th as part of plans to reform welfare and save £5 billion a year. That's now been stripped out. All of the detail that actually would implement those changes has been stripped out of this bill And all we have left is a promise that once Stephen Timms, the Disabilities Minister, has finished his review in the autumn of next year, November next year, that whatever he has recommended as changes will be implemented. But it's highly unlikely, Kate, given the strength on the Labour benches, that we're going to see anything that would amount to what was promised by Rachel Reeves, part of this wider welfare reform.
Yeah.
And Rachel Reeves is now, when it comes to the budget, going to have to find £5 billion in tax rises, and then you've got to take into account the extra money needed to pay for the U-turn on winter fuel allowance. This is a complete capitulation from the government.
Yeah, so it's another 1.5 billion for that winter fuel allowance. And the reason why Rachel Reeves has got to find all of that £5 billion is because this has already been costed in terms of her spending plans and into her autumn budget. So because we know we're not going to get this implemented until after Stephen Timms has done his review, this is now £5 billion short. It was costed in. It now cannot be because of that point. And it could be further watered down as Stephen Timms gets to work on his review as well. Who knows what we'll end up with. Just sum up what this means for Keir Starmer and Rachel Reeves. They tried to do something decisive. They tried to save some cash. Many will say they've gone about it in the wrong way. But how does Keir Starmer look today? What are the optics around the Prime Minister today, Theo?
The Prime Minister looks considerably weaker. The obvious way to compare this, Kate, is to what happened in last summer when there were 7 Labour MPs who voted with an SNP amendment to remove the 2-child benefit cap. And the result was that those 7 Labour MPs lost the whip. A couple of them had the whip restored. But that was the Prime Minister's. He showed his ability to act with strength in the moment. Fast forward to today, we're just a couple of days away from his first anniversary in government, having won that general election in July last year, and his authority has been completely taken from him. He's been defenestrated by this vote. Labour MPs are no longer prepared to put up with a Prime Minister and a Chancellor who they see as implementing changes that run against the core of what they would term to be Labour values. Every time you speak to a Labour MP here who is concerned about the cuts, they saw these changes as running against the mandate on which they were elected to improve the lives of people in society who are voiceless, who need somebody in their corner to fight for them. And they saw these changes, Kate, as running against that, of targeting the poorest and most vulnerable, the sickest, and those most needy in society. And they're no longer prepared to put up with a Prime Minister that does not uphold those values. And that creates a huge problem for Rachel Reeves, the Chancellor, and Keir Starmer, the Prime Minister. But how do they show the markets? How do they show those investors, particularly those who want to come to this country, that they have the public finances in?
Yeah. Theo, thank you very much. We're losing you slightly, but job well done in terms of getting those votes across and what they mean. We may well connect with you again in the next half an hour. That is Theo Ushwood, Times Radio's political correspondent. More reaction to these votes on the welfare bill. The government's welfare bill has passed on this second reading. It'll go through to third reading. Majority of just 75, though. It was closer than many had anticipated. We're going to follow this up with a discussion with the Shadow Chancellor, Mel Stride. He'll join us alongside Kirsty Buchanan for more assessment about where Labour are now. And what a mess the day has been. Their welfare reform bill is in tatters at the moment. It's all a bit TBC, isn't it? Let's get a full summary of the news first, though, from Nick Ellaby.
Across the UK, on DAB Digital Radio, on the Times Radio app, and on your smart speaker. This is Times Radio.
Thanks, Kate. Good evening. The government's welfare bill has passed on the second reading. MPs backed it by 335 votes to 260, giving the government a majority of 75. That's after an amendment to the bill was rejected and ministers made a last-minute change to planned welfare reforms in an attempt to prevent a huge backbench rebellion. It means reforms to personal independence payments won't be implemented until a review is complete next autumn. Times Radio's political correspondent is Theo Ushwood.
Angela Rayner has been seen around looking fairly stony-faced, the Deputy Prime Minister. She's been brought in to try and assuage the rebels and persuade them not to go ahead. But we can only be left with the conclusion that actually, despite having done a huge amount of the groundwork last week, the government was still facing a defeat tonight were they not to take this decision to cave in further.
3 bosses at the hospital where Lucy Letby killed 7 babies have been arrested on suspicion of gross negligence manslaughter. They've since been bailed by police. A 92-year-old man will spend the rest of his life behind bars after being jailed for at least 20 years for raping and murdering a woman nearly 6 decades ago. A DNA breakthrough helped convict Ryland Headley of Louisa Dunn's murder in Bristol in 1967. And today is officially the hottest day of the year so far, with a high of 34.7 degrees recorded in London. For a roundup of the news on demand, subscribe to the Times News Briefing on any podcast platform.
This is Times Radio.
At Aberdeen Asian Income Fund, we understand Asia because we're here. For over 30 years, we've been on the ground, searching for the most compelling and high-performing companies across the Asia-Pacific region. But it's not just about capital growth. Asia offers abundant opportunities for those seeking income. Unlock Asia's potential and invest with us today. Search Aberdeen Asian Income Fund online to find out more. When investing, please remember that your capital is at risk.
McDonald's burgers are prepared to order. And the patties are made from whole cuts of beef, sourced from farms across Britain and Ireland, with a pinch of salt and pepper, nothing else. There's not much else to say, really. That sizzle speaks louder than words. Served after 11 a.m, subject to availability.
Download the latest episode of Off Air with Jane Garvey and Fee Glover, available wherever you get your podcasts. Across the UK, on DAB Digital Radio, on the Times Radio app, and on your smart speaker. The Evening Edition with Kate.
Controversial welfare reforms have passed their second reading in the Commons, but not before the Prime Minister was forced into more concessions. We heard from Stephen Timms announcing that the government was not going to raise the threshold for personal independent payments, or PIP payments, until, or any changes would not happen until he'd conducted a review of PIP. We now know that MPs were defeated. There was a rebel amendment. A majority of 179 MPs were defeated in that rebel amendment. And the welfare bill at second reading was voted through with a majority of 75. Let's speak to Richard Bergen now, the Labour MP for Leeds East. Richard, I gather you're with us. Good evening.
Good evening. How are you?
Very well. Look, thank you very much for speaking to us. Are you one of the 42 Labour MPs who voted for the reasoned amendment, the rebel amendment from Rachel Maskell?
I voted for Rachel Maskell's reasoned amendment, which would have defeated the bill if it had been passed. And I voted against the disability benefits cuts bill at the vote at second reading as well.
OK, so you also voted against it at second reading too. Tell us why.
Well, the reason I did that is because this is bad news to my disabled constituents. This bill is about trying to balance the books on the backs of disabled people. Various promises were made today in order to save political face, but MPs were still asked to vote through an unamended bill containing personal independence payments cuts, but also put those promises about PIP to one side. What's still remaining in the bill, and what the government has made no promises on, is the fact that 750,000 sick and disabled people are going to lose their universal credit to the tune of more than £2 billion in total as of next year. That's still in the bill. The government aren't promising to take that out. I didn't get involved in Labour politics in order to take money from sick and disabled people, and that's what this bill is still doing. There was lots of confusion going around. It was getting very chaotic. But I think that when MPs look at the detail of this in the upcoming days, I think many of them who didn't vote against today will think that maybe they should vote against at the next stage.
Do you think the bill should have been pulled before it was voted upon?
I think it was outrageous the bill wasn't pulled today. This was about saving political face. What the government should have done is have simply not brought the bill to a vote today and come back with the bill after the Timms review, for example, or even before. They could have sat down and worked with disabled people and others to draw up something that actually means we have a welfare system that works for disabled people and others.
Well, in Stephen Timms' defence, that's what he's now going to do, albeit a concession, albeit it's been a bit of a topsy-turvy, messy day. That's what he says he's going to do. And you still voting against the bill at second reading, does that mean there is a breakdown of trust between you and the higher echelons of the party, Keir Starmer and his ministers? You are concerned that what you're being promised will not happen?
Well, for me, tonight is about my disabled constituents rather than about the who's up and who's down in Westminster. But what I would say...
But is there a breakdown of trust, honestly? Because you've been messed around a lot over this bill.
Yeah, but what I would say was that today was a complete circus. People who have been in here as MPs for 10 years, like myself, or even longer, like others, have never seen a bill dealt with in this way. It's not good for Parliament. And obviously, trust has been reduced. Trust that the backbenchers has been reduced by this process. So rather than pulling the bill, they rammed it through tonight with an artificial politically imposed deadline to save political face. And then next week, they're rushing it through in a really unusual way. They're having all the remaining stages of the bill and the third reading next Wednesday. Now, that means that expert disability and disabled witnesses can't give evidence because it's going to be a committee of the full House, not a committee stage that we normally have. For something as important and fundamental as this, that affects so many millions of disabled people, that's just wrong. And of course, MPs feel deeply uneasy about that. And it makes lots of us think, what on earth's going on here?
And Richard Bergen, who do you lay the blame for this chaos on? Do you blame it number 10, the Chief Whips, or Rachel Reeves or Liz Kendall?
Well, I don't blame the whips for this. It's not the job of the whips to decide what we're voting on. It's the job of the whips to try and make sure that Labour MPs vote with the whip. At the end of the day, the Prime Minister has to bear responsibility for this. It wasn't in our manifesto. The Labour Party didn't decide to do this. It's been rushed through and rammed through Parliament in a really undignified, concerning way. They could have pulled the bill. 138 disabled people's organisations were asking MPs to vote against this bill tonight. Not a single disabled people's organisation could be named by the Secretary of State for the Department of Work and Pensions as supporting this bill. That should have made, along with all the representations being made by backbenchers, should have made the government think again and thought, you know what, better not to bring it to a vote tonight and instead get back to work, get back to the drawing board, bring a new bill instead. That's what they should have done.
Look, Richard, we will leave it there. We are waiting to speak to Mel Stride, the Shadow Chancellor. It'll be interesting to see what he says. But thank you for your honesty. Thank you for being with us tonight. That is Richard Bergen, who is the Labour MP for Leeds East. He voted for that rebel amendment, although that was ultimately not successful, and also voted against the bill at second reading. He did make it through, by the way, but you've heard some of Richard Bergen's concerns there. Said the bill should have been pulled before the vote, called today a complete circus. Let's speak to the Shadow Chancellor, Mel Stride, then. He's not with us. Apologies. Kirsty, some assessment from you, if we can, over what's been, not a great day for the senior leadership.
No, it was interesting to hear Richard Bergen saying this was all about saving face. I'm not entirely sure how much face saving's been done at number 10 today. Look, they've got this second reading over the line, but at what cost? We'd had this extraordinary day of drama and emotion which sort of descended into farce 2 hours after the Work and Pensions Secretary Liz Kendall stood at the dispatch box and said there would be no further concessions. There was a further massive U-turn in the face of a respected rebellion that might have imperilled the bill. Now that has effectively hollowed out the bill completely at a cost to the Chancellor's finances of £5 billion. That's on top of the £1.5 billion that she's trying to find from the winter fuel payments U-turn. And it's hugely damaged the Prime Minister's authority with his own parliamentary party and with the nation at large. So how it got to this stage in the first place is going to be the subject of a lot of blame gaming, I suspect, over the next few weeks. And there are serious questions being asked about the role of the Chancellor in all of this. In essence, that this was driven by the panic of her needing to fill a hole in her finances rather than any considered, sensible, thought-out welfare reform package. I think most people would agree that the welfare bill is unsustainable and that we need wholesale reform of the system, but this certainly wasn't the way to go about it.
Yeah. Let's speak to Mel Stride then, the Shadow Chancellor. Mel, good evening to you.
Good evening, Kate.
Right. Give us your assessment, first of all, Mel. How do we describe what's happened today in the House of Commons with the announcement that there was to be no movement on this bill at all, and then the concession announced by Stephen Timms that actually he would be able to conduct his review before any of the changes came into place, to then what ended up being a pretty narrow pass at second reading?
Yeah. And what's happened, Kate, is in order to get this bill through second reading, the government has basically gutted it. There are very little of the savings that remain. It's almost unrecognisable compared to what it brought towards the House. And I think what it demonstrates is the crazy nature in which this government went about welfare reform. When I was Secretary of State at Work and Pensions, I reformed welfare. It takes time. It takes a lot of thought. You have to consult. And then you end up often fundamentally reforming benefits to make sure they're fair to the taxpayer, but equally still targeted on those that need support. What this government did actually was it realised in the spring, because it had mismanaged the economy, it had run out of money. Rachel Reeves called across to DWP and said, I need £5 billion to build up my headroom against my fiscal targets. And at the last minute, the only thing you can do is what they did, which was to pull all these levers frantically, cut benefits left, right and centre. And not surprisingly, you end up with a really bad approach, which, of course, their own backbenchers have decided they cannot stomach.
Would you have pulled the bill after all of the events of the day? Would you have pulled the bill to try and get some of this sorted out? Or do you think the government had to go with it? They would have looked even weaker had they pulled it.
Well, put it this way. I mean, it's not a question for me as to whether I would have pulled it. It's the government's bill. But if the question is, might the government have pulled it, they might just as well have done. They've taken out what's called Clause 5 in the bill, which is all the HIP reform stuff, which is the bulk of the changes that they were bringing in. I mean, it's been completely shredded. So I don't know what they can discuss in committee when they get it through there, but there's not much of the bill left to be done.
And Mel Stride, this has obviously left a huge hole in the Chancellor's finances. What does this mean for the budget in the autumn?
Yeah, it's a really good question. It probably means more tax rises paid for by hard-working people. So if you look at what's happened here, plus the U-turn on winter fuel payments, that U-turn on winter fuel payments was about £1.25 billion commitment. We've probably seen here, I'm suspecting, about another 4.5 to 5 billion that has just been stripped out of this bill, which, remember, is already baked into the OBR's numbers and forecasts. So if you add that up, she's probably about 6 billion of unfunded commitments now as she goes into the autumn. Well, the headroom is only 10 billion, so that's about 60% of the headroom. Now we've had very weak growth because of the decisions that this government have taken, and admittedly some of the tariff problems that there are around the world at the moment. You add all those things up, and to get to your question, I think what it means is the headroom will probably have disappeared. She'll have to rebuild it, and she did in the spring, and this time I think she'll be coming for more tax cuts. But there's one other point I'd like to make that's really important, is if you demonstrate, as the government has tonight, that it doesn't have control of its backbenchers, particularly when it comes to controlling spending, that's a dangerous message to send to the markets. Because further on down the line in this government, if they reach a point where the markets are expecting them to get a grip on spending, and they say they will, the markets may well decide that they don't believe them, because they've seen what's happened here tonight. And that translates you through into higher borrowing costs, higher costs for businesses, higher costs for those that have mortgages.
The whole way through, Mel Stride, of course, the government was merely reacting, they said, to some of the fiscal mess left by the Conservative government, the big £20 billion black hole, trying to make concessions, having to make up more money than they'd previously anticipated. That has been a running commentary the whole way through. Is there any concession? I mean, we have seen the welfare bill rise exponentially. I mean, there have been huge rises in the last 5 years. The welfare system has not had, it doesn't appear that government had a grip on it at all. This is the Conservative government. And the number of claims for mental health issues has also skyrocketed. Is there any concession from you that because of the pandemic, because of the situation the world, the country was in, that actually some of the situation we're in now is because not enough was done while the Conservatives were in power, because it's such a sticky issue? Welfare, as we've seen today, is so contentious when you try and make any kind of reforms.
Well, we had brought in some quite big reforms, actually. So we consulted on and made changes to the work capability assessment, which is the gateway into long-term sickness and disability benefits. And the OBR had already scored that as a £5 billion saving. And what they said was that 450,000 fewer people would be going on to those benefits as a direct consequence of those reforms. We had also, while we were in office, consulted in detail on PIP and fundamental reforms to PIP, and we had a very clear plan to make very significant savings, £12 billion plus a year thereafter, had we won the last election. And we got ourselves in a position when we managed to get those reforms through, because we hadn't done it at the last minute and botched it as this government had. We took our time and we did it in a principled way, both fair to the taxpayer and fair to those who need support.
Do you think meaningful welfare reform is dead for the next 4 years, given what we've seen today?
I think what this government has shown is that there's blood in the water now, and I think any rebels on their side, they always say in this place, I've been here 15 years, the most difficult rebellion is your first.
Oh, we've lost the line there to Mel Stride. He may well appear again. I've got slight dodgy connections through.
You got me? Yeah.
Yes, hello, we've got you, Mel. Sorry, carry on.
Me. No, I was just saying, sorry, I hope you can hear me now. I was just simply saying that once somebody's rebelled in the Commons, it's much easier to rebel the second time around. And I think the chances of this government getting meaningful welfare reform through now is going to be extraordinarily difficult. And that's going to come at a great cost to the country.
I mean,
these bills do need to be gripped.
Yeah, you had plans as the Conservative government. You were, of course, Shadow Secretary of State for Work and Pensions as well in your time. Or you were Secretary of State, weren't you, for Work and Pensions under Rishi Sunak? Sorry, not Shadow. You are Shadow now. Is there any concession from you, Mel Stride? You may have put your plans together to save £12 billion, as you say, but they were not tested, were they, to the point of being voted upon? They were part of your strategy leading up to the last general election.
I've got to head off to another
interview.
Oh,
apologies.
Just very quickly to answer your question. We had it, for example, with PIP, which is where most of the savings would have happened through this bill. We had consulted on major changes to PIP. We were well on the way to a principled fundamental reform of that benefit that would, as I say, have been fair to taxpayers, but particularly fair to some of the most vulnerable and needy people in the country as well.
Mel Stride, thank you so much for being with us. The Shadow Chancellor there, former Work and Pensions Secretary under Rishi Sunak, of course. Gosh, Kirsty, what do we make of what we've heard so far? In fact, here's a question for you in from one of our listeners, Steve the Gardener in Maidenhead. Honest question, why on earth has this bill descended into such a shambles? Is it ineptitude, a lack of political vision, sloppiness? It seems like an absolute mess that even the Tories wouldn't have managed.
I'm not entirely sure about the last bit of that, whether I agree. You remember some of the disastrous voting lobbies under Liz Truss particularly. Look, why